The storm hit on a Tuesday, which was meaningless because I hadn't tracked days of the week in about 4 years. I only know it was a Tuesday because the relay ping log stamps everything, and when I went back later to look, there it was. Tuesday, 3:17 hours local, the particulate sensors tripped their first alarm. By 600 the corridor was sealed. By noon I couldn't see the marker post 15 meters from the front lock, and the reserve cells were pulling double duty on the filtration system, because the ambient dust density outside had climbed to the kind of reading that means you don't open exterior hatches until it drops by a factor of 6. I had food for 90 days, water reclamation running clean, power enough. I had been alone at Way Station 7 for 11 months by that point, and a curtain storm, while inconvenient, was not a crisis. I brewed a second cup of pressed grain, sat down at the relay console, and logged the storm onset into the corridor event record the way the protocol said to. Then I checked the filtration alarm schedule, confirmed the reserve cells were drawing correctly, verified that the exterior seals on all 3 hatches were holding, and went back to the log I'd been working through, 11 months of accumulated event records, being organized and compressed for the quarterly archive submission that nobody ever read. That was 6:23. At 9:41, the cargo lock exterior sensor tripped. I sat with that for a moment. The cargo lock is on the north face, which is the windward side in a curtain storm, which means anything that reaches it has either been blown there from somewhere along the corridor or has walked there under its own power. Blown debris is common in a curtain event: loose marker cable, empty transit cases, the occasional piece of equipment that wasn't properly stowed at a corridor post. But blown debris does not trigger a body mass sensor. The sensor is calibrated to filter debris up to about 30 kilograms. What tripped it was heavier than that, or shaped differently, or both. I pulled up the exterior visual, which was mostly gray particulate. The storm's early hours are the worst visibility, before the dust pattern settles into its own rhythm. But the cargo lock camera is recessed under a shielded housing specifically for curtain event observation, and after a moment I could make out 2 shapes pressed against the hatch. Small shapes, close together, leaning into each other in the way you lean when you have been leaning for a long time, and the surface you're against is the only thing holding you upright. I went through the cycle protocol. Exterior pressure equalization first, then inner seal confirmation, then the dust purge cycle that takes 4 minutes and 30 seconds because the purge has to clear the hatch vestibule before the inner seal can open without contaminating the main corridor. 4 minutes and 30 seconds is a long time when you're watching 2 small shapes on a camera feed. I watched the storm behind them and thought about how far they could have walked in that dust density, and what it would have taken to keep walking. The inner seal opened. They fell in together, the way 2 people fall when they have been leaning on the same surface for a long time and that surface suddenly moves. The older one caught herself, both hands flat on the cargo lock floor, head down, arms shaking slightly with the effort of the catch. The younger one didn't quite manage it and ended up on one knee, and the older one had her arm in both hands before I had crossed half the room. She pulled the younger one upright with a practiced efficiency that told me she had done it before, recently, more than once. Velthorin. I could see that in the first moment, pale gray-violet skin, both of them, the kind of color that looks fragile until you remember that Velthorin physiology is built for exactly this sort of sustained physical stress. Oversized silver eyes, ringed in the faintest trace of darker gray. Dark hair, both of them, matted with dust and the condensation that curtain storm particulate leaves on everything it coats when the air is humid enough. The older one was wearing a child's transit tunic with a carry loop sewn into the back between the shoulder blades, the kind of loop a larger person grabs to haul a child clear of something fast, and the loop was stretched and one of its rings was partially bent. Something had grabbed it hard. The younger one had both arms wrapped around a small rectangular case, sealed, about the size of a standard document carrier, held against her chest with the focused grip of a person carrying something that matters. They looked at me. I looked at them. I said in standard corridor dialect, "Come inside, there's water." The older one, somewhere around 6, I thought, though I have never been reliable at estimating child ages, looked at her sister, then back at me with the kind of expression that is doing visible arithmetic. Not fear, assessment. She was deciding something, running through a calculation I could not see, and she arrived at a conclusion and acted on it with the efficiency she had shown catching her sister. She nodded. Once, precisely. The younger one just looked at me with those silver eyes. She was still holding the case. I got them through the inner seal and into the main corridor, and sealed the cargo lock behind us, and ran the repressurization cycle so the vestibule was clear. Then I got them water. The utility room was the closest space with a bench and the water tap, and that was where we sat, them on the equipment bench with cups of warm water, which I heated because cold water after extended cold exposure is harder on the body than people expect, and ration blocks, which were the simplest thing I had. The older one drank steadily and completely, the way you drink when you are disciplined about it. The younger one drank half, then looked at the ration block, then looked at me. I said the block was hers. She could eat it. She ate it. Their names, I asked, and I got them. The older one said Sira quietly, in the way of someone who is used to providing information in response to direct questions, and is doing so now because it is the appropriate thing. The younger one said, after a pause during which she appeared to be consulting with herself, Sovi. Sira corrected something, a pronunciation, I thought, or possibly an inflection in the Velthoran syllable structure that I couldn't distinguish. And Sovi repeated it without apparent offense, in the resigned way of someone who has had this correction before, and has accepted its recurrence as a feature of the relationship. Where had they come from? Convoy, said Sira. Where was the convoy? She didn't know, said Sira. They had been walking for a long time before the storm got bad. Where was their mother? A pause. Sira looked at the wall to the left of my head. I would learn over the following days that this was what she did when she was organizing what she knew against what she was willing to say, running an internal audit before speaking. Then she said, "Looking for us, probably." That was my complete information. 2 children. A curtain storm classified Sigma 3 with an estimated duration of 7 to 14 days. A mother somewhere on the corridor who was, probably, looking for them. I fed them a second ration block each and showed them to the bunk room, which had 4 bunks and had contained only me for 11 months. Sira inspected the room with the same systematic attention she brought to everything, not anxious, not hurried, just thorough. She checked the corners, noted the single exit, looked at the ceiling joints, looked at the floor. She opened the wall locker next to the nearest bunk. I had told her she could look at anything she needed to and examined its contents briefly and closed it again. Sovi put her case on the bunk nearest the door, set it carefully against the wall so it was not at risk of rolling off, and then climbed up beside it and sat cross-legged and looked at the room with her hands in her lap, in the manner of someone taking inventory. I told them I was going to log the storm duration query into the relay system, that they should stay in the room, that my name was Dale, and that if they needed anything they should come to the console room, which was at the end of the corridor on the left. Sovi said, "Dale." Sira said, "Thank you." I went to the console. The storm query came back in 40 minutes. Curtain event classification Sigma 3, estimated duration 7 to 14 days, corridor-wide seal in effect, no authorized transit. I logged it, filed the atmospheric event notice, updated the reserve cell draw schedule to account for the filtration load, and sat for a moment looking at the relay console with my hands flat on the desk. Then I opened the active stations query and sent a ping to every way station and transit post on the Keth Morville corridor. 2 Velthoran female children recovered, Way Station 7, South Central Dust Corridor. Child A, approximately 6 years, transit tunic with carry loop rear-mounted, dark hair, silver eyes, no identification documents on her person. Child B, approximately 4 years, carrying a sealed document case, dark hair, silver eyes, no identification documents on her person. Both in good condition as of storm intake 9:41 hours, awaiting corridor clearance for transit coordination. If any party is searching for these children, please relay to Way Station 7, Keth Morville Corridor, frequency 7.4 on the standard band. I sent it on the 1400 ping cycle, because the 1400 cycle was what the protocol said for recovery events, and logged it in the event record with full notations. Then I went back to the bunk room and asked if they were hungry. The answer from Scifi was immediate and affirmative. That was day 1. By day 3, I had the shape of it. Sira ate methodically and completely, whatever was in front of her, without commentary, and would wait in silence for whatever came next without appearing to be waiting. The patience of someone who has internalized waiting as a skill rather than enduring it as a condition. Scifi ate most of what was in front of her and then asked about the rest of it, where it came from, what it was made of, how the machine that produced it worked, whether the machine was part of the station or had been brought separately. Sira answered most of these questions before I could, accurately, in the tone of someone providing a service they have provided many times and expect to provide again. Scifi accepted these answers and asked follow-up questions, and Sira answered those too. I had the sense, by day 3, that Sira had constructed an internal map of the entire way station from the first room and the corridor, and the utility room and the bunk room alone. She had not asked to see any other part of the station. But when I needed a secondary coupling from the parts locker on day 2, she said, from the doorway of the bunk room, that the locker was probably through the door at the end of the north corridor based on the layout of the ventilation conduits she had seen from the main corridor junction. She was right. I told her so. She received this confirmation with a small nod and went back to what she was doing. What she was doing, I would discover, was reading. She had a small text reader she had produced from somewhere inside her transit tunic's inner pocket, which I had not previously known the tunic contained. She read in the same focused way she did everything else, not quickly, not slowly, but completely. I once asked her what she was reading. She said it was a systems manual. I asked for what system. She said, this station. I asked where she had gotten a systems manual for Way Station 7. She said it had been in the bunk room wall locker. I said I hadn't known that. She said, I know. Scifi asked me on day 3 what the relay console did. I told her it sent pings. She said, what are pings? I told her pings were signals, short ones, regular ones, that the station sent out to tell the rest of the corridor that it was here and operational and had information available. She thought about this, looking at a point somewhere past my shoulder, in the same wall-focused way her sister did, which I was already beginning to understand was not a Velthoran thing, but a family thing, a shared habit of looking away from the person when thinking, as if the eyes being elsewhere freed up some internal resource for the thinking. Then she said, like saying here. Yes, I said, exactly like saying here. She thought about it some more. Then she said, we should send one for Mama. I told her I already had. I told her I sent one every day at 1400 on the standard band, and that every active station on the corridor received it, and that anyone searching for them would have heard it by now. She looked at the wall again. Then she said, okay. The case never left her bunk. She did not open it in my presence. She slept with it arranged against the wall, not at the bunk's edge, and on the 4th day I noticed that each time Scifi fell asleep and her arm moved the case toward the edge in the unconscious shifting of sleep, Sira would get up quietly and move it back to the wall side. This meant Sira was staying awake past Scifi's sleep, monitoring, which was not something I was going to address. Children manage things. The management was hers to do. On the fifth day, I asked Sira what was in the case. She looked at the wall. She said, "Mama's work. She told us to keep it safe." I said that made sense. She said, "Do you want to know more?" I said, "Only if you want to tell me." She considered that. Then she said, "No, not yet." I said, "That's fine." Day 5 also produced the first administrative problem. The corridor event management system, which was automated and operated without nuance, flagged my event record entry about the children and generated an unsanctioned shelter notice, citing the fact that Waystation 7 held decommissioned status and was not classified as an active transit facility authorized to hold non-registered occupants. The notice specified that I was required to transfer any such occupants to the nearest active transit facility within 72 hours of their arrival for administrative processing. The nearest active transit facility was Corridor Station 12. Corridor Station 12 was approximately 400 kilometers northwest, into the storm, which was, according to the corridor event system, still classified Sigma 3. I filed a storm duration extension request under Emergency Clause 19, which allows a decommissioned facility to temporarily maintain occupants in active storm conditions when transit is classified as hazardous. The clause does not have an automatic renewal mechanism. Each extension has to be filed manually, with documentation within the extension period. But the initial filing resets the administrative clock to 0 and gives 10 days. I filed it within the first hour of receiving the notice, with a full attachment of the storm classification, the particulate density log, and the transit hazard assessment from the corridor event system. Then I logged every step of this in the event record. Every ping sent, every administrative notice received, every response filed, every timestamp. In 31 years of compact transit relay work, I had seen what happens when the record is incomplete, and what happens is that the people who needed protecting don't get protected. The record was going to be complete. Then I went and told Sira and Sovi that they were staying. Sira said, "We know." Sovi said, "Are you going to send the 1400 ping?" I said yes. She said, "Can I watch?" I said she could. She sat on the floor beside the console chair. The chair is elevated, and the floor put her at approximately the right height to see the middle of the screen, and watched me run the daily ping. I had been running it without narrating it. That day I read it out loud, because it occurred to me that she should know exactly what was being sent. When I got to the line that said both in good condition, Sovi reached up and pressed 2 fingers flat against the corner of the screen where the transmission indicator light was cycling, and held them there steady, until the ping completed its send sequence and the indicator went dark. She took her hand down. She said, "Okay." Then she got up and went back to the bunk room. I sat with that for a moment. Then I logged the ping confirmation in the event record and went back to work. On day 6 it rained inside. This is a thing that happens in older decommissioned way stations when the humidity control system is running off reserve cells at high load in a high particulate density atmosphere. Condensation collects in the ceiling conduit junctions over a period of hours, and then comes through the secondary ventilation vents as a fine mist for approximately 40 minutes, until the humidity system recalibrates and clears the buildup. I had experienced it once before at this station, during a lesser particulate event in my second month here, and had noted it in the maintenance log and filed a report with the decommissioning office, which had not acted on it. The station was decommissioned. The decommissioning office's position was that non-critical maintenance items at decommissioned facilities were addressed in order of priority, and the priority queue was long. I told Sira and Sovi about it when it started, standing in the main corridor doorway. I told them it would resolve in about 40 minutes, that the water was clean condensate and not a leak, and that it was cold. Sophie walked out into the corridor with her arms extended and let it fall on her. She said, "It is cold." I said, "Yes." She said, "Sira, it's cold, come feel." Sira came out and stood in it briefly, arms at her sides, and said, "Yes, it's cold." Sophie stood in it a little longer. She was looking up at the ceiling vents with an expression I had learned to associate with the beginning of a question chain. She said, "Does it always do this?" I said, "When the dust is heavy outside and the reserve cells are working hard." She said, "So the station is working hard?" I said, "Yes, in a sense. The filtration system is running above its normal load." She thought about it. She said, "Then it should rest after." I said, "It does, usually. Once the storm lets up and the external density drops, the filtration load reduces and the reserve cells have room to recharge." She seemed satisfied. She stood in the mist a moment longer, then looked at her arms, then looked at me. She said, "I'm cold now." I got her a thermal layer. She put it on over her transit tunic and immediately became indistinguishable in silhouette from a small pile of fabric with eyes. Sira watched this and said, "She does that with every layer." Sophie said, "It's warm." On day 7, Sira asked me a question that was not about the station or the systems or the practical mechanics of anything. She asked, "Have you been here alone for a long time?" I said, 11 months. She said, "Alone?" I said, "Yes." She looked at the relay console. It was running the midday check cycle, and the display was scrolling the standard status readout, station designation, reserve cell level, filtration status, relay band confirmation. She watched it for a moment. Then she said, "But you sent pings." I said, "Yes. Every day at 1400. It's part of the protocol for an active relay post, even a decommissioned one that's been repurposed as a monitoring station." She said, "So something knew you were here." I said, "The corridor system. Yes. Whatever stations were active on the band could confirm the station was running." She looked at the wall. Then she said, "That's not nothing." I did not have an answer to that. I sat with it for a moment, and then the status readout finished its cycle and the display returned to the standard input screen, and I went back to the log I was working on. But I thought about it later. 11 months of daily pings going out on the 1400 cycle, confirming that Way Station 7 was here and running and had information to share. And I had never once thought about what it was like from the other side. Someone on the corridor receiving the daily ping from an empty station, and knowing there was a person there, in the corridor's dead middle stretch, holding the post. That's not nothing. 11 months, and I had not thought of it that way until a 6-year-old looked at my console. Day 8 brought the second administrative flag. The regional clearance office had received the unsanctioned shelter notice and the storm extension filing, and had sent a secondary inquiry requesting formal documentation of the children's transit status, identification numbers, convoy manifest entries, caregiver registration, medical clearance documentation. I had none of it. They had arrived with their clothes and the case and nothing in their pockets that I had been given permission to look through. I responded with the complete event record to date, intake time, condition notes, storm classification, extension filing, daily ping log, all of it. I attached a statement explaining that the children had arrived in an apparent convoy dispersal event preceding the storm onset, that their documents were not in their possession at time of intake, and that I was maintaining their welfare and conducting daily corridor notifications pending storm clearance and contact with a responsible party. The regional clearance office acknowledged receipt and informed me that the matter was being logged for follow-up review. I replied that I was logging everything and asked them to confirm that my event record entries were being received and time-stamped at their end. They confirmed. I said, "I want a confirmation number for each entry." There was a delay of about 20 minutes. Then they sent confirmation numbers for all 11 entries I had made to that point. I logged the confirmation numbers. I had worked in compact transit relay administration for 31 years. I knew what a follow-up review meant. Someone, eventually, would look at the complete record and make a determination. The determination would be made on the basis of the record. The record was going to be complete and correct and time-stamped and confirmed. Whatever determination came, it would come from a full picture of what had actually happened. That was all I could do, so I did it carefully. On day 9, Scifi told me about her mother. She did it the way children tell things that matter to them, sideways, in the middle of something else, as if the thing is too large to approach directly, and has to be approached from an angle while the hands are occupied elsewhere. In this case, she was sitting on the utility room floor, methodically, refolding a set of thermal layers that had come out of the equipment crate slightly wrinkled. She was very serious about the corners. She said, "Mama checks the manifests." I said, "What manifests?" She said, "The convoy manifests, the transit manifests, all the manifests on the corridor. She checks where things are supposed to be and where they actually are and whether the gap is a problem." I said, "That's an important job." She folded the corner. She says knowing where things are is how you keep things from getting lost. I said, "That's true." She smoothed the fold. A pause, then she knows where we are. I said, "I believe she does by now. She would have heard the pings by day 2 at the latest." Scifi said, "She's been looking." I said, "I expect she has been looking since before the pings, since the convoy dispersal." Scifi nodded, still looking at the thermal layer. She said, "She'll come when the storm stops." I said, "I expect she will." She picked up the next layer. She said, "Sira thinks so too, but Sira doesn't say things like that out loud." I said I'd noticed. Scifi said, "She says it uses up words that might be needed for something else." I sat with that for a moment, then I said, "Do you think she's right about that?" Scifi considered seriously. She said, "I think some words are like the case. You carry them and they're heavy, but you keep them because they matter. And some words are like the mist on day 6. They happen and then they're done and the air is clearer after." I said, "Which kind are the ones Sira doesn't say?" She thought about it. She said, "Both, I think. That's why she doesn't say them. She doesn't know which kind they are yet." I said, "That sounds right." She looked up at me then, briefly, and there was something in those silver eyes that was older than 4 years old. The way children who have been through something real sometimes look older than their age in a single, unguarded moment. She said, "I have enough words for both of us." I said, "I know." I looked at the thermal layer I was supposed to be folding, which I had not folded, and folded it. On day 10, the primary filtration cell block gave its depletion warning at 3:30, which woke me. The alarm was calibrated to sound at 40% reserve rather than 20, because I had adjusted it during my second week at the station, knowing that at 20% there was not enough buffer time to do the manual switchover to the secondary array before the filtration margin dropped below safe atmospheric. I had noted the adjustment in the maintenance log. At 40%, I had approximately 90 minutes. I did the switchover in 55 minutes. It required getting into the utility crawl behind the main panel, rerouting 3 conduit connections, running a manual bleed on the primary line to prevent back pressure, and then waiting at the secondary array monitor until the startup cycle completed and the atmospheric readings confirmed. While the crawl work was happening, the interior temperature dropped approximately 8 degrees, which I had warned Sira and Scifi about before I started, and which they had prepared for with thermal layers. When I came out of the crawl, they were both in the bunk room. Sira was on the floor beside Scifi's bunk, not on a bunk herself, on the floor, with a thermal layer over her shoulders and her back against the bunk frame, reading the station system's manual. Scifi was asleep on the bunk with the case at the wall. Sira looked up when I came in. I said, "All done. Temperature will normalize in about 30 minutes. She said, we know. The secondary array startup cycle takes 22 minutes. After that, the filtration runs at full load and the ambient temperature recovers at approximately 1.3 degrees per 8 minutes. I said, you read that far into the manual? She said, I read all of it. I said, the whole thing? She said, it isn't very long. A lot of it is about systems that aren't currently functional. I said, that's true. She looked at her sister. She said, she always sleeps through the temperature changes. She doesn't notice them. I said, that's good. Sira said, yes. I told her she should rest too. She said she would when Sophie had been asleep long enough. I said, she's already been asleep long enough. Sira said, a little longer. I nodded and went back to the console. At 2200, I ran the manual relay confirmation that the automated system couldn't process on the secondary array. 2 of the standard confirmation routines were incompatible with the secondary's output format, and the workaround was manual, which I had been doing for 11 months because the decommissioning office had not fixed it despite my filing. At 2230, I ran the reserve cell level check and logged the secondary array's draw rate. At 2250, I looked in on the bunk room. Both of them were asleep. Sophie had her arm over the case, not gripping it, just resting on it. The way you rest your hand on something you want to know is still there. Sira was on her bunk now. She had moved at some point in the last hour, lying on her side with her face toward the door, the way you sleep when part of you is still listening. I turned the corridor light down to minimal and went back to the console. Day 11. The storm broke at 4:12. The particulate sensors registered the change in stages over about 2 hours: heavy, then moderate, then light, then trace amounts, then the clear air reading that I had not seen on those sensors since the storm began. I ran the full clearance protocol, all 4 steps, including the exterior hatch safety test that I ran even though I already knew the hatch was safe, because the protocol said to run it and the protocol existed for reasons. At 6:34, I filed the storm end notification with the corridor event system. At 6:35, I sent a priority ping. Off-cycle, not the 1400 window, a priority ping, which I had not sent in 11 months, and which costs an elevated draw on the reserve cells that I had not been willing to spend on anything before this morning. The priority ping goes out on all active corridor bands simultaneously, not just the standard band, and carries a higher urgency classification that flags it as requiring immediate review by any receiving station. The message was the same information I had been sending every day at 1400, both in good condition. Storm cleared. Way Station 7, South Central Corridor, awaiting contact. Then I made pressed grain and sat with it. They woke at 7:02, which I knew because the bunk room is 2 doors from the console room, and I could hear the change in sounds, the specific shift from sleep silence to the small sounds of children being awake. And then Sophie was in the corridor, moving fast, and she appeared in the console room doorway and looked at the exterior visual on the secondary screen, which was showing clear corridor and marker posts in the flat morning light. She said the storm stopped. I said yes. She said, Mama can come now. I said yes. She stood there a moment longer, looking at the screen. Then she went back to the bunk room, and I heard her say Sira's name, quiet, and heard Sira's quieter response, and then the ordinary sounds of 2 children having a morning continued. I kept working. At 8:47, Sophie came back to the console room and asked if she could watch the ping. I said I had already sent a priority one, but I could run the acknowledgement check so she could see the responses as they came in. She sat down on the floor beside the console chair, the same position she had taken on day 3. The acknowledgements came in over about 25 minutes, active stations confirming receipt of the storm clearance notification, stations checking in with their own post-storm status. The routing office query about filtration function after multi-day heavy particulate. I confirmed filtration fully operational, secondary array running, primary due for cell replacement at next provisioning. Then, at 9:11, a relay came in from corridor station 12, forwarding a contact request logged against my priority ping. It was from a Velthoran Transit Manifest officer who had been at Station 12's communications desk for an extended period, checking every incoming message on every available frequency, looking for 2 children in the dust corridor. I read it once to be certain I had it correctly. Then I said Scifi. She was already looking at my face, not the screen. She had learned in 11 days that the screen showed what was happening but my face showed what it meant. I said, "Someone at corridor station 12 has been looking for you." She was off the floor before I finished the sentence. She was through the doorway before I could stand. I heard her say Sira's name once, clear and sharp and completely without her usual sideways approach, just the name direct, the way you say a name when everything else is secondary. And I heard Sira say what in the careful, even voice that Sira used for everything, and then I heard Scifi say, "The ping worked, Sira. It worked." I set up the voice relay connection to station 12. I am not going to write what that call sounded like. There are things that are not mine to put into words, things that happen between people that an outside person witnesses only at the edge. And what I witnessed at the edge of that 4-minute voice call belongs to 3 people, not 4. I will say that when the connection closed, Sira came to the console room doorway and looked at me with the same expression she had used when she told me the secondary array startup cycle was 22 minutes long, the expression of someone reporting a confirmed fact, and said, "She's coming. She has a transport with storm clearance authorization and she's coming now." I said, "Good." Sira looked at me for a moment longer than necessary. Then she said, "She wants to talk to you." The manifest officer's name was Vale Sorketh. Her voice on the relay channel was steady with the specific quality of steadiness that is produced by sustained effort and has not been put down yet. She said, "You kept them." I said they were here. The storm was 11 days. She said, "You sent pings." I said, "That's the protocol for a recovery event. Daily ping on the 1400 cycle, full description, both children's condition." She said, "Every day." I said, "Every day." A pause. She said, "I heard everyone." I said, "I'm glad the band was reaching you." She said, "I will be at your station in approximately 3 hours. I want to." She paused, and I could hear her deciding something in the same way her daughters paused before saying the things that mattered. Then she said, "I want to say something properly, to your face." I said, "You don't need to." She said, "I know I don't need to." I said, "All right, come when you can." She said, "I'll be there in 3 hours." I closed the relay channel and sat for a moment, looking at the console. Then I went and asked if Scifi and Sira were hungry. The answer from Scifi was immediate and affirmative and nearly identical to every previous answer she had given on this subject. And I had been at the station alone for 11 months before their arrival, and something about the 11 days of that answer, the absolute reliability of it, the fact that she was 4 years old and hungry, and asked about it directly without managing or suppressing the asking, did something to the back of my chest that I was not entirely prepared for. I made rations. We ate in the utility room, the 3 of us, and Scifi talked about her mother's work, the manifest system, the convoy tracking, the way her mother could look at a corridor map and tell you where any given shipment was within a 2-hour window. Sira ate her ration completely and corrected Scifi's facts about convoy tracking intervals at 2 points, and once, without particular emphasis, mentioned something about the corridor's eastern section that she had read in a document in the bunk room wall locker. I said, "I didn't know there was a document about the eastern section in that locker." Sira said, "There were 17 documents." I said, "17." She said, 8 of them are maintenance records from before the decommissioning. 4 are corridor survey extracts. 2 are protocol amendments that supersede sections of the manual I read. 1 is a complaint filed by a previous occupant about the filtration alarm calibration. 1 is a letter that I don't think was meant to be left there. And 1 is a map of the corridor that predates the current marker post system. I said, "You cataloged them." She said, "I made a list in the reader." I sat with that. 11 months alone at the station, and I had not known the wall locker held 17 documents. An 8-day project of systematic inventory by a 6-year-old had found them all. Sophie said, "Sira catalogs things." Sira said, "Organizing reduces the time you spend looking for things you need." Sophie said, "She organized the bunk room on day 2. I said, "I noticed." Sira said, "I noticed you noticed, but you didn't say anything." I said, "It wasn't my bunk room anymore. It was yours." Sira looked at the wall, then she looked at her ration block, then she finished it. At 1100, the exterior approach sensor registered a vehicle, not the body mass sensor, the approach sensor, which picks up the transit signature of a corridor runner on the access path at about 2 kilometers out. I had the exterior visual up before Sophie reached the console room doorway, which she did at approximately the same moment. The transport was a mid-size corridor runner with compact transit authority markings and a clearance beacon on its roof, running because it had come through the storm's residual tail end, where the dust pattern was still settling. It was moving at moderate approach speed, which is the speed you travel when you have been hurrying for 11 days, and the destination is now 2 kilometers away, and you are allowing yourself to arrive rather than arrive badly. Sophie was already at the cargo lock. I said, "I have to run the cycle protocol first." She said, "I know." She stood at the inner seal door with her hands at her sides while I ran the protocol. Exterior pressure equalization, inner seal confirmation, dust purge, 4 minutes and 30 seconds. She did not move during the 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Sira came up behind her and put her hand between Sophie's shoulder blades, flat, and left it there. The inner seal opened. Vale Sorketh was tall, as Velthoran adults tend to be, with the same pale gray-violet skin as her daughters and the same silver-ringed eyes, and dark hair pulled back with the practical firmness of someone who has had their hands full for 11 days and no spare attention for anything else. She was wearing a transit officer's field jacket that had acquired the look of something worn without pause, the kind of worn that comes from sleeping in something and not changing it because there was always something more urgent. She came through the cargo lock and across the vestibule, and the inner seal was barely clear before Sophie was moving. Sophie moved the way she did everything, directly, completely, without managing it. She still had the case, and she carried it into her mother's arms with her, and the collision of that reunion was not quiet. Vale went to one knee in the cargo lock, which put her at Sophie's eye level, which put her at the same posture I had used 11 days ago when I first told them to come inside, and she had both arms around Sophie and the case together, and Sophie had her face against her mother's neck, and the sound Sophie made was the sound of a child who has been keeping something held very carefully for 11 days and can finally set it down. Sira walked to her, not ran, walked, with the same measured pace she used for everything, and when she reached her mother she put her forehead against her mother's shoulder and closed her eyes. Vale's arm came around her without looking, with the accuracy of long practice, and held her. I went back to the console. Some things you witness at the edge, and that was enough. After a while, 15 minutes 20, I did not track it precisely. I heard footsteps in the corridor. Vale Sorketh came to the console room doorway. She had the case in her hands now. Not Sophie. Sophie had surrendered it once her mother had confirmed it was intact, which was apparently the criterion she had been holding it for, and she was looking at the room, at the relay console, at the ping log still up on the main screen showing 11 days of entries. She said, "I want to see the log." I turned the screen so she could see it better. She read through it without touching anything, starting from the first entry at day 1, 1400 hours, and going through all 11, the daily descriptions, the condition confirmations, the administrative filings, the extension request, the confirmation numbers from the regional clearance office, the storm end notification, the priority ping. She read it all. Then she looked at me. She said, "You kept them." I said they were here. The storm made transit impossible. She said, "You filed the administrative extension. You logged every step." I said, "That's how you protect the record." She said, "You sent the priority ping the morning the storm broke." I said, "I'd been running the 1400 cycle for 11 days. An off-cycle priority ping costs more draw, but the storm was over and I wanted it on every band." She said, "I heard it at 6:39. I had been at the Station 12 communications desk since 500. I said, "I sent it at 6:35. She said, "4 minutes. I said, "The relay band is faster than that usually." She looked at me for a moment. Then she looked at the ping log again. She said, "Every day at 1400. I said, "That's the protocol." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Can I sit down?" I pulled the second chair from the side of the room, where it had been sitting unused for 11 months, and set it by the console. She sat. She put the case on her knees and her hands on top of it and looked at the screen. She said they were all right. I said they were all right. Sierra has read the entire station system's manual and cataloged 17 documents from the bunk room wall locker. Scifi reorganized the thermal layer storage on day 7 and has a complete understanding of the reserve cell draw cycle. Vale looked at me. I said, "They're capable children." She said quietly, "They are." We sat for a while. At 13:45, Scifi came and sat on the floor beside the console chair, in her usual position, and watched the relay status readout. At about 13:55, she fell asleep. She fell asleep the way she always did, suddenly, completely, without apparent transition, just present and then deeply not present, with her head on her folded arms on the floor. Vale looked at her. I said, "She does that." Vale said, "I know." Sierra appeared in the doorway at 13:58. She looked at Scifi. She looked at her mother. She looked at me. Then she walked to the console chair and climbed into it, crossways as always, feet not reaching the floor, and folded her arms and closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed in about 4 minutes. I ran the 1400 ping. I read the standard header, the station designation, the storm clearance status, the reserve cell level. I did not include the children's description because the recovery was concluded, but I logged in the event record in the notes field of the 1400 ping entry, "Recovery concluded successfully. Both children transferred to parental custody. Administrative extension closed. All documentation complete." Then I sat on the floor beside the chair. My knees registered a complaint. I registered the complaint and set it aside. The console was at approximately eye level from here. The filtration system was running its standard post-storm cycle. Outside, the corridor was clear and the light was flat and pale, and even the way it always is when the dust settles, colorless, steady, nothing hiding in it. At 14:20, I heard Vale move in her chair. I looked over at her. She was looking at Scifi on the floor and Sierra in the chair, and then she looked at me on the floor beside the chair. She sat down on the floor next to me. We did not say anything. The console ran its cycles. The filtration system did its work. Sierra breathed in the slow rhythm of someone who is finally, completely asleep. Scifi's hand had relaxed open on the floor, fingers loose, the way hands go when there is nothing left to hold. Vale's daughters were asleep. The storm was over. The pings had worked. We sat on the floor of a decommissioned way station in the middle of the dust corridor, and I ran the 1430 status check and the 1500 reserve level log, and she sat beside me while I did it, and neither of us said anything because there was nothing that needed saying. That's all, that's the whole of it. I have thought about it since, in the months that followed, about what it was to hear the same ping every day at 1400 on every active station band, and know, each time, that it meant the children were still here and still in good condition. About Sophie with 2 fingers against the transmission indicator light, holding them steady until the cycle completed. About Sierra on day 7 looking at my relay console and saying that's not nothing, in the tone she used when she was reporting a confirmed fact. I've thought about Vale at the station 12 communications desk at 500, waiting on every band, and the 4 minutes between when I sent the priority ping and when she heard it. 4 minutes after 11 days. The corridor has been clear since the storm. The pings go out every day at 1400 the way they always have. Standard header, station designation, status line, band confirmation. Here and running and information to share, the same as it was for 11 months before the storm, and 11 days during it, and all the months after. Sophie sent me a message 3 months later, relayed through Station 12, written in the careful block letters of a child practicing a new writing system. It said, "The station rested. It is working again. The pings are going out. We know you are there." Sierra added a line below it in smaller writing, even and precise. I completed the inventory. There are also 4 items in the console room left wall cabinet that are not listed in the maintenance records. You may want to know. I got up from the console chair and went and looked in the left wall cabinet. 4 items, she was right. I logged them. Then I sat back down and ran the 1400 ping, the way I always had, and I thought, that's not nothing. I know that now,